Welcome to the EDHEC Family Business series on leading the family business in extraordinary times. We hope that you are well and healthy, as well as your families. This series was launched by the EDHEC Family Business Center to provide support to the family businesses and their stakeholders in these difficult times, to find some inspiration and to have some reflection frameworks to be able to better deal with this crisis. So the agenda for today will be held in 4 axes with 3 speakers. So we have Fabian Bernhard, who is Associate Professor of Organizational Behavior and Family Business at EDHEC Business School. Elie Salameh, who's Professor of Accounting at EDHEC Business School. And myself, Rania Labaki. I'm the Director of the EDHEC Business Center, Family Business Center, and also Associate Professor of Family Business and Finance. So we are all members of the EDHEC Family Business Center and very pleased to share with you some research, but also practice insights during these 45 minutes together. The topic of the day is managing the family business human and financial resources during crisis. As I just mentioned, we will have 4 different points to address in the agenda today. So first of all, I will start by a brief introduction of our center and our activities, followed by the presentation divided into 2 parts. First, the human resources management, and second, the financial resources management. And we'll end up with Q&A. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat as we move on, and make sure that your microphones are muted to avoid any sound interferences. So as an introduction, the EDHEC Family Business Center was created 8 years ago in 2012 with the support of several family businesses and other large corporations. Today, 8 years after, we are also supported by 4 families, the Méliès family, the Michelin family, the Roquette family, and the Please turn off your mics. Thank you. So our vision and mission are about supporting the family businesses and their stakeholders in perpetuating the long-term entrepreneurial model, which is very specific to family businesses across generations, through inspiring, serving the stakeholders of family businesses and family businesses themselves, creating knowledge, developing solutions, proposing answers and tools, and educating family businesses and their stakeholders, while also connecting and sharing through events. All this is very much rooted in the EDHEC vision about making a positive impact. Our main activities, therefore, are threefold: academic and applied research, which come to support the education programs and the different events to share practices. Our approach is holistic, so we do not only look at the traditional systems of any business, such as enterprise, ownership, and environment. We also look into the family, and we do not only address the financial dimensions, but also the socio and emotional dimensions of family businesses. We have several research projects going on, and which translate into education programs, mainly around succession, legal, financial and tax frameworks, socio-cultural impact of family businesses, and family intra and entrepreneurship. We organize customized programs for family businesses and other organizations, as you can see on the slide. And we also organize events. So as we are moving on online because of the crisis, we will be probably organizing more and more webinars as well. So we have a team of 4 researchers and professors with multidisciplinary fields of expertise. Ludovic Caillé, who is expert in strategic management and history. He was a speaker of our first webinar last week. And then Fabian Bernhard around mainly emotional and psychological dimensions of family business. Elie Salameh around, financial information and decisions in family business. And myself, I study mainly the family dynamics with emotions and financial and entrepreneurial decisions. So this is for our center. Now I would like to hand it over to Fabian to start by sharing with us his research around managing human resources. So the research that Fabian will be sharing was recently published in Journal of Business Research and also in media outlets such as Forbes Online. Fabian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rania. I hope you can hear me and understand me. And I'm very happy and grateful that I am given here the... Oh, hold on 1 second. This is what always happens. The phone rings as soon as I want to start. Yes, I'm talking about my research on human resources. And this study, as Rania said, was already published on the Journal of Business Research and also on the Forbes Online magazine. So I will answer all the questions afterwards. Yeah, my phone, sorry. This is, okay. Now it should be off. So, and if you have any other questions, you can also look in these articles, and I will summarize the results really quickly for you now in a couple of minutes. And this research project was conducted by myself and a researcher from Switzerland and the US from Boston. And in a team of 3 people, we were very much interested in what do crises do to people, especially to managers. And we focused not on the business sphere, but we were interested in looking at how does the business sphere influence the family life. So what we did is we looked during the financial crisis in 2009 and 2012. We conducted a set of interviews with 182 senior managers in different companies. And these senior managers were relatively high positions. They were heads or directors of different departments in German and Swiss companies. So in some of these companies, the financial crisis struck very hard. So many of these companies suffered quite a bit. And that, of course, had some impact on the manager's well-being. So what we did is we interviewed these people, and we were asking them questions about the company side, but also about their private life. And what we found should be not very surprising to you. Some companies that suffered quite a bit from their organizational side, that had a really crash in performance, were not only impacted by the business, but also the managers reported that also their family life suffered quite a bit and that they run quite in severe work-family conflict. So the crisis transferred to the family life. Managers were oftentimes very much stressed. Managers in general have a lot of stress, but in times of crisis when the company is underperforming, this stress was kind of a pressure cooker to them, and it transferred to other areas. So those managers who reported underperformance in their business also reported very much a strong interference in their private life. Not super surprising, but stress per se is not very negative. There can be positive aspects of stress, such as increased motivation, but also very negative aspects of stress. So we looked into the research and the literature and wanted to find out how does it determine if we consider stress as negative. What usually happens is how we deal with stress depends on the...
So, sorry, can you please turn off your mics? For those of you who have unmuted mics, sorry for that.
Somebody is speaking. So it depends if you consider stress as positive or negative. That depends on the supply, that the resources that you can draw on and the support resources. Meaning, if you have enough time, if you have support from your family, from your boss, that might make you deal much easier with stress than if you don't have these resources. So in particular, we were interested what kind of support resources did these managers have that could maybe mitigate their stress from their suffering firm and the effect on their work-family life. In particular, we looked at how much time did they have to do their work, time availability, which is usually a big support to mitigate stress. Also, what kind of recognition did they get? If you have a very supportive supervisor who gives you lots of recognition and recognizes what you do for the company, that can mitigate your stress as well. We also looked at justice. How fair are things? Is your supervisor fair? Are the processes or the organization overall considered as fair? And we looked also at the level of monitoring, because we know from the literature the way or how much you are controlled in your organization can put a lot of stress on you. So maybe loosening the level of monitoring on you could be a support factor that reduces the stress in these managers. However, what we found in our studies, and again it's from 2009 and 2012, in the midst of the financial crisis, what we found is that all these support factors, which usually should deliver a resource for the managers to draw on, did not work. They did not work in times of crisis. Time availability slightly worked, but not as much as we expected it to happen. So what we've learned from this research is, well, those managers who are in an underperforming company had a lot of stress. And even though the companies offered support systems and resources to them, it still transferred to their work-family conflict. So the question that we had is, okay, we understand in times of crisis, support systems do not work. But what can you do then? Especially if you're from a family business, it might be quite relevant because the sphere of organization and family overlap. So what can you do? Well, one suggestion is that if you look at the graph on the left side, it says perceived organizational performance. So what we noticed, and what I would in a nutshell give as some advice, is look closely how your workforce or your management perceives the organizational performance. So maybe it's not the medicine that you give by terms of support or resources, but you start earlier and look at the disease itself and it doesn't break out. Maybe you should put a lot of careful thought on how you communicate the crisis to your workforce. Maybe you can influence their perception. So if you don't talk about the crisis, usually what happens is that people perceive the crisis much worse than it actually is. Rumors go a long way. And even if you communicate the way, maybe you can influence the perception of your workforce or your top management. Maybe you give them a positive outlook. Maybe you point to the opportunities of this crisis. So this type of communication and how you talk and communicate about it, especially if your company is suffering, might influence the perception of the workforce, which in the end might reduce their stress and the work-family conflict. So that's in a nutshell. And as I said, the results are in Forbes or Journal of Business Research, and I will be available later for more questions.
Thank you, Fabian. So building on what you just said regarding the importance of, the perception that the managers can have and the role of optimism and positive vibes in the way in the organization, I did a research on managing emotional dynamics during crisis. So this is based on a research report where I looked at 5 multi-generational families facing critical crisis. What is worth noting here is that this research has been undergone in multicultural context with other researchers from Latin America, from America, North America, Europe, and Asia. So we found that the stressors mainly do not only come from the business, but also from the family. And more importantly, from the intersection between the family and the business. So basically, in family businesses, there might be some paradoxes which are triggers for stress. Unethical behavior that can be, the act of some family members in the business sphere. Some health issues that might struck family members, such as accident, illness, death. Some identity crisis, either across generations or within the same generation, and some relationship conflicts. So these are other examples of stressors which might trigger crises that might undermine both the business and the family. So we looked at how families manage those crises over time and realized that there are 2 times in a way that family businesses use to be able to deal with a crisis. So the intervention strategies that families use are rather dynamic. And to be able to understand this, I will guide you through the mental process that triggers emotional dynamics based partly on appraisal theory, which was also emerging from the data that we collected. So basically, when an event or an action takes place, for example, it could be, the coronavirus pandemic, it could be, another relationship conflict in the business, this leads to an appraisal by the family members. So the family members will analyze that event, that action, and based on this assessment, this appraisal, they will get an emotional response. So the appraisal will generate an emotional response, which could be positive, which could be negative, positive emotions or negative emotions. And therefore, this will translate into behavior and into action. So family members will do something about it. So the research showed that basically there are 2 ways of dealing with such emotional dynamic. So first of all, using emotion-focused intervention, which means that we will be choosing a tool or a mean to be able to either reduce the intensity of our emotion or transfer our emotion into another emotion, which could be more pleasant, and this in turn will impact our behavior. So, for example, I use this cartoon to just illustrate if there is a conflict between, the CEO and the potential successor, the fact that the CEO will come and discuss with the successor that kind of emotion and try to reassure him, this will allow the successor to transform, in a way, this negative emotion into a positive one. So, therefore, the emotion response, will have an impact on the event itself, on the action itself, which will be reappraised differently and which will lead to a different behavior. So the impact will be made from the emotion response back to the event, back to the behavior or action. Another way that family businesses can also deal with such crisis is to use a problem-focused intervention, which means that the family members will focus on the way the assessment of the problem is being made. In other words, just try, to reconsider the different perceptions. Fabian was talking about perceptions. So to what extent the way we have interpreted this event was the right way to do it, was relevant, to what extent we were biased in this interpretation, and by reconsidering, the interpretation of the event, we will be able to get another emotional response, and consequently, we will be able to have a different behavior. So these intervention strategies, first emotion-focused and then problem-focused, can help manage the emotional dynamics. Now, what is worth noting is that on the short term, family businesses tend to deal with a difficult situation by using emotion-focused intervention. And on the longer term, especially when the family, gets more experience regarding similar crises, similar types of crisis, it will start using problem-focused intervention. Concretely, what kind of interventions those families can have? A portfolio where the family can tap in, sometimes using one or more. So it's more or less kind of on a continuum of formal to informal strategies. So it could start, with spiritual support, which you can find under the first extreme of the continuum, which means that the family will look into religious frame of reference or into a spiritual representative to find support on how to deal with the situation. It could be a priest, it could be a guru, it could be a shaman, depending on the cultures. The family can also try to educate itself by networking, going to attend different events, or being educated. The family can also look into the chief emotional officer, who is usually a family member, usually a woman, the grandmother, the spouse, the mother, who will be here to heal, those negative emotions and to try to bind everyone back together. So everybody, is respectful of that person and will, listen to that person and act accordingly. Another intervention could be family therapy or psychology for the family in a systemic way, so everybody take part in it. Governance structures, mainly family governance structures, can be also helpful. And also, legal or other types of consulting support can prove helpful. So the families over time, throughout the crisis that they will go through, they will tend to use a diverse set. And, instead of waiting to be proactive, they will be more preventive and more productive in the way they will manage their emotional dynamics. So just to wrap up quickly, there are different stressors that might lead to crisis, whether from the family side, the business side, or the broader environment, like the coronavirus pandemic that we are encountering now. This can lead to different types of intervention strategies, proactive, preventive, emotion, or problem-focused, and the outcomes, the positive outcomes out of this is family harmony, business continuity, but also stakeholders' value, because we know that family businesses have strong relationships with stakeholders, and there are very special particularities of this that will lead us to our next part on the financial management of the resources with Elie, who will also focus on the stakeholders aspect. Elie,
thank you, Rania. Hello, everybody. We know that during extraordinary times, family firms and other companies focus mainly on the most important assets, which is the human capital, but they also worry about the financial issues as well. So although the impact of the current event, the full impact of the current event is still unknown, but one thing is certain, that this event will have very important financial ramifications that will be felt throughout the whole supply chain, from raw material and services delivered by suppliers through the production process till the delivery of goods and services to customers. And of course, the supply chain disruptions will have important cash flow implications that cannot be underestimated. So now, how companies, how family firms, how companies can deal with cash flow problems? There are several alternatives to deal with cash flow problems. Family firms and companies can look for a financial support. For example, in France, we know that many support measures have been made available for French businesses, in other countries also. Companies, family firms and companies can cut or suspend dividend payments. Based on some research, we know that family firms usually pay lower dividend compared to non-family firms. There are also other alternatives and solutions, financial solutions. Maybe they will be developed more by Rania in the second part of this presentation, but I will mainly focus on an option that could be very good for family firms, which is developing internal financing or internal liquidity. Developing internal liquidity could be done either through cost cutting or through optimizing working capital management. And the good option available for family business is more developing or improving working capital management, because cost cutting is or could be done through sometimes some aggressive measures. For example, mainly through a reduction of labor cost, which is not really in value in line with family businesses' value. That's why. So for family business, developing internal financing and liquidity could be done through focusing on the working capital management and on the cash conversion cycle. How? Under normal conditions, companies primarily focus on the profit and loss. Routine back office activities like paying bills or turning receivables into cash are taken for granted. But in extraordinary times, in abnormal conditions, smart companies are shifting the focus from the income statement to the balance sheet. They focus on the three main elements of the supply chain working capital, being receivables, inventories, and payables, in order to shorten the cash conversion cycle and to minimize working capital requirement. What I mean by cash conversion cycle, to be very simple, it is how long it takes to convert cash outflow into cash inflow. So now, how companies can optimize working capital? The companies can, of course, focus on inventory management. They can extend payable or take more time to pay suppliers, but also they can manage and accelerate the collection of money from customers. Companies, as I said, can focus on inventory management. Many techniques are available, but in these extraordinary times, one thing is important. Companies should maybe update the inventory safety parameters in order to reflect the increased supply and demand volatility of inventory. I will mainly talk about extending payables or take more time to pay suppliers, but doing that reasonably. Why reasonably? Because during difficult times, companies may decide to, by their own, to delay payment to suppliers, to force extension on their suppliers. You know, this approach is likely to damage the relationship with supplier, and relations is essential for family businesses. So it's recommended mainly for family businesses to work with suppliers in order to propose them some solutions, in order to work together to establish an agreement that both the company and the supplier can live with. Companies also can manage and accelerate receivables or the collection of money from customers in order to increase internal liquidity. As I mentioned in my previous point, a company having a strategy to delay payment to suppliers, maybe the company's customers are thinking about doing the same thing. So that's why it's worth taking a hard look on how receivables are being managed by the company, and with this regard, it's important to get the basics right, such as, for example, timely and accurate invoicing, because error in the billing invoice may lead to costly delay in receiving cash from customers. Some aggressive techniques or tactics could be used by the company as factoring receivables, although expensive, but could tweak the cash inflow. But mainly, I suppose that companies can focus on the relationship with customers, on proposing some interesting dynamic solutions, discounting solutions to customers, especially customers that are able to pay. To conclude about this, family firms tend to focus on durable relationships or relations where trust and personal relations play a key role towards value creation. So these extraordinary times, these abnormal circumstances, could be considered as an opportunity to build trust, to build loyalty with different stakeholders, mainly here customers and suppliers. The company can offer them interesting deals, rates to get together through this, to be by their side, to maintain the relationship with them. There are some conditions where, for example, the company may accelerate payment to a supplier who is in a critical financial situation, because after all, trust and loyalty should be considered as the best investment the company may have. I think that Rania also have to develop more financial solutions that could be available for the company in such extraordinary times.
Thank you, Elie. So building on what you just said around the importance of loyalty in family businesses, this echoes a study that I have made on one of the Henokians family businesses. Henokians is an association of businesses who are family owned and who have more than 200-year-olds. So Bancotank is one of them, and I tried to understand what are the key lessons that this family business had to be able to survive many crises over more than 200 years, actually. And what was interesting to note is that there are different stakeholders that the family connects with throughout the centuries, and some of them are connected in a multi-generational way. So basically, there are circles of loyalties around the family that are transferred from one generation to the other. So clients are multi-generational. Family allies, like partners, could be influential actors in the political sphere, for example. They are also, multi-generational. So this means that, the family, by building those relationships, can have something to support better the business, and also be able to support those partners in return. So these are like, mutual loyalties that, Elie was mentioning. So, take this opportunity of building those relationships, which will be helpful in the next crisis as well. We have also published, we'll be providing you with the references, several articles around this. We talked about short-term, financial management, the cash flow conversion cycle, but we need also to keep the big picture in mind and the long-term implications, of course, on the relationship level, but also on the financial value creation level. So for this, I will focus on one of the financial decisions which could be made today with a long-term consequences, divestment. So we often talk about investment, financing, dividends. Oftentimes, we know that family businesses are ready to sacrifice dividends, and it's the case during this crisis as well. But let's keep in mind also that divestment could be an option, especially when the family needs the cash or the family has some family shareholders who need the cash to survive difficult situations. But we need to keep in mind that when we think about divestment, it's not only about the financials, it's also about the emotions. So to what extent those family members are willing to sell one asset, several assets, while, seeing there is a value in it. So to what extent they're emotionally attached and to what extent they're able to let go their emotional attachment because of some financials coming in. Here you have some examples. Two of them are French, Champagne Tétinger or Chateau Yquem, where family shareholders either were reluctant first to sell and then they were able to sell when the deal was worth the emotions that they were putting into this value, which was so the case of Chateau Yquem, and Champagne Tétinger, where after the sale, a family member decided to buy back the business. So keep this divestment as an option and think about the weight of emotions in your decision making. Because when we think about divestment, we need to take into account the emotion of regret. To what extent are we going to regret that decision? And to be able to make it, we need also to account for the emotional value that would come out of the divestment and also the financial value. So how much money in terms of financial value, to put it simply, in terms of emotional value, to think whether this divestment will, reduce the conflicts in the business or on the contrary, will increase the conflicts in the business. And for this, for this reasoning to take place, it is worth also considering the family business emotional archetypes that you have or that your client has. Do you have a family business which is rather enmeshed, which means that the level of emotional interaction with the family and the business is very strong? Is it a family business which is balanced, the middle type, where there's a balance in the degree of interaction, or there is a complete disengagement between the family and the business? What are the different views of the family businesses regarding the value of an asset, keeping in mind that there's an emotional component, and make a reasoning in terms of options and decide what is the best in this crisis today. So these are some insights about our research on the topic. We would like to leave you before taking a few questions with 2 reflection questions for you or for your clients or the family business that you are referring to in your practice. To what extent the current crisis impacted relationships with the family members, the suppliers and the clients, the employees and the broader community, on the financial level, the emotional level as well, and what are the next steps to deal with them, given the insights that you heard during this presentation based on our research. So take the time to reflect on these questions, how the crisis impacted your relationships, and what are the next steps that you would like to take to deal with them. Now it's time to take a few questions. So please ask your questions in the chat, and I'll refer to the speakers who are able to answer. I just have a comment, which is a good point on the importance of communication. Brian. Other positive comments. So, okay, so we have questions coming in. How is it possible to deal with the negative emotion due to the uncertainty of this period of crisis as a family firm in control of several employees, and to deal with financial stress during the lockdowns, even when there is a reserve cash, usually not available in many SMEs, to have strategies to make an intervention to communicate to their employees? Okay, so Indeed, I will try to answer, but Fabian, also feel free to jump in. Of course, as I said, negative emotions are there, but also let's not forget that positive emotions can be also generated in this crisis by collaborating together. So research shows, for example, because of the loyalty of the employees, support the families also during the crisis. And also there are some actions that the family can take to make a support that is more collective through philanthropic actions, for example. And today we can see many family businesses engaging, in philanthropic actions. And philanthropic actions, which are altruistic by nature, are known to generate positive emotions. So positive emotions also by, being cohesive together to support others, has an important part to play to be able to, overcome those negative emotions. So it's also about communication. And by the way, there will be an article in Les Éco-Solutions, which will be published next week, about how to better communicate with the employees during crisis in family business. So stay tuned. Fabian, do you want to add something? There's a question actually. Also, sorry, there's also a question about your study in the chat. So is it possible to go back to your study to make a new survey over what's going on right now in this crisis?
Well, our study, even though it was conducted during the financial crisis 2009 and 2012, and it's only published now, I mean, I think the situation is very similar. I mean, many employees that I spoke with, or many managers that I spoke with, have certain fears to their organization and to their job security, for example, that was very, very similar to the financial crisis, and that happened now again. So if we did a survey, I'm pretty much convinced that the concerns and the stress level that people are facing right now is very similar to that we've seen in the financial crisis 2009. And I think the results are still very valid. And as you pointed out, communication is key. On the one side, communication is key because if you don't communicate, you create rumors. Your managers, your employees, they don't know what's going on. They watch the news. And as we know, sometimes news create a certain atmosphere of fear, of concern. And that will spread out through rumors and the floor talk. I mean, certainly that will happen. So it's key, essential, first of all, to communicate. And second of all, it's how you communicate. I think as a good leader, and in many of the leadership courses that you've certainly taken, I'm sure that you've learned how to communicate and how to lead people. And I think if you're in giving a certain vision, a certain focus on the future, how you see how you can develop, meaning so-called transformational leadership styles, giving some positive outlook, focusing on the opportunities, you can create certainly an atmosphere that takes away certain negative emotions and focus on the opportunities. I'm not saying that people won't have any fear, but at least you can suppress the certain rumors that are around this crisis and make things worse and increase the stress level. So I can just jump in and say communication is key.
Yes, thank you, Fabian. So also the agility in leadership, to be able to transform the emotions in that organization. We have a quick question about ethics and compliance, and together with Fabian, we have done research around ethical decisions. So are they more tolerant in this, in this crisis situation, more understandable? I mean, we have done research showing that, when there is a misbehavior, if it's not impacting the family business right now, it might have an impact in the future. So the future generations might go back to that decision and might, because they might feel guilty for it and might behave accordingly. So keep in mind, again, the long term. Maybe right now things will not really matter, but on the long term, it can have an impact. So keep it in mind. And we have a quick question about purpose-driven organization. indeed, you know, with a roundtable statement back in August, we know that, you know, family businesses are getting closer in terms of purpose than, you know, non-family corporations. Those corporations want to pursue stakeholders' value creation. So indeed, this crisis might be the opportunity for them to go through this.
And especially if you think of family businesses, I mean, they, especially those that are very long-term and have been around, they can always tell the stories how they managed previous crises, how they managed the financial crisis, or how they managed crisis in the past, and that can, of course, give confidence.
Yes. Maybe one last question for Elie. Elie, do you think that portfolio review and cash reallocation for a business, from a business to another, is an appropriate measure in the middle of such crisis? We can't hear you, Elie. Please unmute your mic.
Okay. In my opinion, I think that companies should mainly, you know, focus first on short-term measures. I mean, what I mentioned about managing working capital. But yes, of course, any other, you know, any other alternative could be that could be impacting positively the cash flow or the liquidity situation of the position of the company is also welcome. But maybe focusing first on short-term measurements or actions, and then maybe searching for reallocation of cash to other businesses or other solutions, maybe later on a longer term, if extraordinary times take more and more time.
Thank you, Elie. Thank you all for asking your questions. So please stay safe, stay connected. You'll receive a link to view again this presentation, this webinar. If you haven't registered yet, there are very, very few seats left for our next two webinars. Please make sure you connect again. Thank you all, and hopefully we will connect again in the future.
Thank you.